Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your time today, and thanks very much to ARENA for inviting the CFC over to participate in this summit. It is my honour to be representing the CFC. Just firstly, a little bit about me and my role in the CFC to give, I guess, the rest of my presentation, I guess, a bit of context, and to answer the question around banking, the future of renewables and why it's so important. My background is in project finance. I've worked in, I guess, the engine rooms of one of the large domestic banks in Australia, working on financing projects across renewables, mining infrastructure, oil and gas and other economic infrastructure. So my time in the CFC in the last 12 months or so, I've been basically the large-scale solar lead. I've led nearly $500 million worth of deployment in investments in large-scale solar projects across Australia, which equates to around 600 megawatts in capacity. A lot of the projects that we were involved in were the beneficiaries of ARENA grant funding. And I think most people would agree that the ARENA large-scale solar funding round was an astounding success. It not only kick-started the industry, the large-scale solar industry in Australia, but it also has meant that in a very short period of time, so only 12 to 18 months, vanilla large-scale solar projects are now basically commercially viable without any grant funding. And that is an amazing achievement in an extremely short period of time, and the CFC is very proud to have worked alongside ARENA to achieve this amazing outcome. Now, just on the topic of banking on the future of renewables, firstly, what is banking and what is bankability? I often get asked that question. I guess really put very simply, basically it means that being bankable means that a project or a corporate or enterprise has risks that are acceptable enough for private investors and financiers to actually invest. And then on the other side of the equation, basically investors and financiers need to work out that they've got sufficient returns to take on that risk that's involved in entering into this enterprise or project or corporate. So that's very simple in a nutshell. And I guess the question, why is it important to the future of renewables? I guess we all can acknowledge that the goals that Australia has, and indeed globally, towards deep carbon emissions are lofty goals. And in order to really transform the energy sector and transform our economy towards a net zero emissions in the future, we really need the private sector on board to actually invest in basically low carbon technologies and renewable energy. So in terms of the CFC and who we are, we see ourselves as a catalyst to the flow of funds into renewable energy, energy efficiency and low emissions technologies. So we are essentially a $10 billion fund that invests on behalf of Australian taxpayers for profit, basically, for Australian taxpayers, but with commercial rigour. We have a variety of people across our organisation with very different experiences. So a lot of us are from the private sector, range from bankers to traders, lawyers, private equity, also people from the energy sector and some scientists as well. So it's a very varied organisation, which means that we actually have a very unique skill set. We are able to team up our financial expertise, basically, with our deep industry sector experience in the energy sector to come up with innovative financial structuring so that we can basically make projects that were previously not bankable to the traditional banking market to basically make them investable so that ultimately we can show a path forward for investors and for financiers. And I guess how do we do this? I guess we've got a very broad spectrum of investments that we actually make across our organisation, which makes it a very interesting organisation to work in. So on the one hand, we've got, I guess, to characterise it very simply, big dollars, big impact kind of investments. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we've got smaller dollars, but investments which impact small to medium-sized enterprises and which impact our day-to-day lives. And then beyond that spectrum, I also characterise that we've also got a very unique part of our organisation which has small dollar investments but potentially huge impact on the Australian economy as we decarbonise the economy. So onto the big dollars and big impact. How have we catalysed investment in this sector? We've been cornerstone investors in 8 Australian climate bonds, which have basically mobilised investment into this sector. It's now a market that's worth over $4 billion with over 100 institutional investors who are investing in that market now. Also in the large-scale solar space, which is my area of expertise, I guess, and also in utility-scale generation. That is a big part of our focus, obviously, as a Clean Energy Finance Corporation. So we've got a big focus on existing technologies like wind, solar, but also emerging technologies such as energy from waste, as well as grid and storage solutions, so things like batteries and pumped hydro as well. So that is a big key part of our organisation. We spend a lot of time working out what is commercial, what's not, and working out what's bankable, what's not. We use a lot of our own financial experience and look at the challenging types of profiles and projects that we see on a day-to-day basis and try to work out basically bankable structures. So for example, in the energy sector at the moment, there's a lot of projects that are being developed, so wind projects and large-scale solar projects, which unfortunately don't have contracts with investment grade retailers, so which is traditionally the bankable kind of profile that banks and basically equity investors like to see. So that means that there's a lot of people coming to us with merchant projects, which means they're uncontracted, or they're coming to us with contracts with sub-investment grade retailers. Also, we're looking increasingly at a space known as the corporate PPA space. So with high energy prices being top of the agenda for a lot of corporates, including a lot of well-rated corporates, there are a lot of corporates now actively in procurement processes to actually link up with energy projects, so it could be wind projects, a lot of solar projects, to actually offset their own load or to at least provide a hedge for their own energy. So we're working hard to see what we can do to actually enable that sector to happen. And then on to the other end of the spectrum, we've got smaller investments, but with impacts on the small to medium enterprise space. We don't, unfortunately, have the size in our organisation to be able to tap into that ourselves, but we've been able to leverage off the financing platforms of the 3 of the 4 domestic banks and also fleet leasing companies to actually provide loans to businesses for energy efficiency. So we've been able to put forward 2,000 loans, which have been successful in putting forward energy efficiency initiatives in those businesses. Also in that space, we are trying to get rid of the intermediaries increasingly, good or bad. I mean, we all like to not like banks, but it's good to get rid of, I guess, an inefficiency in the chain. We have invested in a company called RateSetter, which is Australia's first online peer-to-peer lending platform, and that enables a linkage of investors to willing and able businesses who want to invest in energy efficiency and renewable technologies for their own businesses. So that's one end of the spectrum to the other, and I mentioned before that there was a rather interesting side of our business, which is smaller dollar numbers, but big potential impact, and that is in our innovation fund, which is a $2 million, I guess, reservation of funds to look at new and emerging technologies. So last financial year, we invested $30 million across 4 enterprises. Not big numbers in terms of dollar numbers for these enterprises, but huge impact in what they can potentially do to transform the energy sector. For example, we've invested in a company known as GreenSync. They're a smart energy control business, and basically their business is to look at demand management and as well as integration of on-site renewables and storage as well to as we look into a future that's made with a smart grid. So what does this renewable energy system look like, and what's our vision for the future? This is basically what we see as the vision for the future. It's our long-term vision, and we'd like to be involved in any aspect of this system which requires our assistance in order to make it bankable and financeable, ultimately for investors to be able to follow, so commercial investors to follow, and private financiers to also be comfortable to invest. I guess there's a lot of work to be done, but there's also a lot of exciting things that are happening. So we see that this future energy system is comprised of existing technologies such as wind, large-scale solar, energy from waste, which is still emerging, as well as grid and storage solutions. We also see this supported by dispatchable renewables, such as concentrated solar thermal, as well as increasing storage, grid-scale storage in the system, and other storage such as pumped hydro and grid stability measures. On the other end of the spectrum, in terms of consumers and businesses, we see that energy efficiency, which was a big topic in one of the previous presentations, is a key part of this new energy system, as well as integration of smart software controls in order to have an integrated renewable energy system. So I guess there we have it. That's our vision for the future. It's full of challenges, but we're confident that with our innovative mindset, we'll be able to create a prosperous and low emissions future for Australia. Thank you.